Okay, good evening, everyone, or it might be Sunday or Monday or whenever you choose to do this lesson. It's Saturday night for me, and we're doing another of our chronological Bible studies for Sunday, April 12th, covering periods April 4th through 11th. And I get the opportunity to cover it again. And as many of you know, either you've already experienced it, or if you, well, it'll be you've already experienced most likely because you'll be viewing this sometime after our guest uh, Sunday school combined classes that will all participate tomorrow, and we're excited about that with uh, Kip Caitlin and his family as part of our prayer and minister search. So all that's happening. It's been an exciting weekend, I know, for many, and we'll uh, get to spend time with him tomorrow in class. So we're doing another recorded series, and I'm going to move into it pretty quick. I did want to mention also about many that are going through the lesson. When you see this, we had an opportunity to spend time and celebrate Alan Sutton and his life, and Connie and the family Saturday afternoon at the church. And I want to continue to pray for her and the family, and as she moves on to her next chapter of life. And again, us continue to pray for, we're still in the middle of our 24-hour prayer. No, as a matter of fact, as I'm doing recording this, the official prayer time just finished, but we know we're all going to continue and let God guide us in our minister in our full-time ministry in the organization. So Tim had the opportunity last week. I get to follow Tim again. I'll do a little bit of review, and I've got finishing up on Judges. We're starting to bring Ruth in, First Chronicles from a genealogy standpoint. We have Samuel and Saul being introduced during our time. So again, we've got a lot of stuff to unpack here in our discussions. I've titled this week's lesson "In Search of a King," and I'm doing the lowercase king. If you notice that when you're viewing, I'm doing that intentionally. Like with the recording sessions, feel free to hit pause. I've got a couple conversation questions, so when you're going through and reviewing it with you and whomever else, feel free. You can hit the pause button. I'll give you an opportunity because that was pretty cool. I had that opportunity last time during the freeze when I had to do the recorded sessions where I gave you my contact information, email or text, and I got some text from some of you. So please do that again to generate discussions. I've got my starting on April 5th. Tim started on Samson and went through some of the previous judges, and I'll be picking up on April 5th, which is on our page 386 in our chronological Bible. So let's get after it together and move through it. As we do with each of the studies, some of the historical context we've talked about, again, post Moses and Joshua. The entire Judges period is around 300 and 350 year period. I mentioned this in class last week when Tim was going over the first part of Judges. Is, you think about this historical period, um, not much different from the 1700s to, prior to the United States becoming a country, becoming a nation, to where we are today. We're getting ready to celebrate our 250th year, and all the people, the leaders in history, the characters, all the things that have happened during our period of time. So number of years, just think of it that way, or at least that's the way that I've been thinking of it. Author is unknown. And again, if somebody's got more history or information around that, I know some have mentioned Samuel, which there's a total of 12 judges total that we've gone through or will have gone through today. Samuel's the 13th, if I did my math right. The judges are from the tribe of Judah. Again, the whole cycle is they don't have any leaders. The great leaders that we reflected on with leadership, that we reflected on with Moses and Joshua, but the Israelites are looking for a king, not following God's commands, living in the world, worshiping idols. We talked about Baal and had some good discussion last week about Baal, the god of fertility, and all the different gods, and why the Israelites would go back to other gods with a lowercase g. And in the end, right, it's all about God's faithfulness during the entire period, right here and then and now. So this is a visual, and even when we pick up on the rest of the judges, I'm not going to go through slide by slide. I'm going to do it from a narrative and summary. So the first four here are ones that we went over with Tim last week, and we talked about Abimelech that inserted himself during this period of time. I listed him as a self-proclaimed evil king. And again, we talked about the goddess Deborah, the first prophetess, and each of these have more information. Some have less than the other, but just a visual for you. And I thought it was interesting when I started putting this together. And we actually do this for our life group. Some of our life group members that are watching this might recall us using this in our Bible study that we did last year. So the periods of reign for each of the judges was pretty broad, pretty different, as well as the characteristics of each of the judges. Remember, as we think about judges as we go through, not like judges that we think about today, more from a military ruler standpoint, as you reflect on what a judge represented during that time. I created this really in one slide, one visual. The vicious cycle during this 350-year period. You've probably noticed this when you're reading through your studies here. In those days, Israel had no king, in quotations. That's said almost at the beginning of every chapter, or when every judge is introduced. It's the last sentence, I believe. Again, feel free to double check me on some of this in your studies. Is the last sentence at the end, and it further describes everyone did what they felt that was right in their own eyes. And again, as we think about mankind today and us turning from God, so here's the illustration I created around the cycle, the vicious cycle that continued. Israelites sinned, they're thrown into oppression by the Philistines, all the different neighboring countries that would oppress them. They'd go through a period of repentance where they turned to God and said, "Help, we need help." God would deliver them for a period of time, and then the cycle would continue. So if you had to explain judges in one slide, one simple illustration, this is about as simple as it gets during this period of cycle, all the way through Samuel, and even into when we introduce Saul at the end of our discussion here. This same type of cycle of the Israelites forgetting where they came from, forgetting God, the one true God. Here's my first question, and it's actually the same question. Again, I've thought about this one a lot. I've thought about it more, even more with our Old Testament study. So the warm-up question, Tim asked this before. I'll share my views after a slight pause, as to give you guys an opportunity to hit pause and think about it with whomever you're watching this with. How would you respond if asked, why did God make the decisions he made during the period of Judges? And that can go a lot, you can unpack that a lot of different ways, but just as we reflect and look at the characteristics of each of the different judges, their period of their reign, how God responded to the cycle each time, that's that's a question. As I've reflected on this question many times, again, I know we know that the true and very classic answers that we've talked about a lot of God is a jealous God, right? Our God, the one and only God, is not going to be second to anyone, and he's righteous, but he will demonstrate it over and over again when the Israelites would forget and turn away. There was punishment that occurred, but we've talked about how brutal when you read through the death, the destruction of individuals, of the fighting that's going on during the period of time. It's you could easily get into a discussion with someone around, is God really just? What was his God's thinking? And again, when we went into this last week, Tim summarized it around, in the end, right? Only God knows. Only God knows. God has the biggest picture. We always go back to, and I do also, back to the story of Job, and that's helpful in discussions when you're having discussions with someone else around this period of time. But this 350-year period and why the judges were put into place, why an earthly king, because that's getting ready to happen pretty soon, what the Israelites were asking for. It's very interesting question. Okay, here's the summary of the judges left. This is the slide. Again, you can pause, have some of your own discussions around each of them. Some of these judges we're more familiar with in previous studies. Some, again, like the first four that we talked about, there's not a whole lot about some of them. We've talked about wealth. Some are demonstrated through how they're described with wealth. Gideon, who we talked about some last week, all the way up to Samson and Delilah, and covers uh, five or six chapters around the story of Samson and Delilah. And there's a lot to unpack there if you want to spend time and do some reflection around Samson. And Samson described as having the spirit of the Lord. And Samson was a Nazarite. Then we begin a transition. We transition in, and I am going to go ahead and have some discussion around Ruth, make reference to Chronicles, and do the introduction of Samuel and Saul. And then at the conclusion, if some of you might remember, if you watched the last recorded session that I did on the book of Job, I've got I ran an animation at the very end, and I'm doing this again for the book of Judges. There's about a 7-minute animation that's good. Again, I've used them in some of the children and teenage classes that gives a good summary of the book of Judges. I'm intentionally going to do that at the end just so I don't have to switch slides back and forth. So that'll be the uh, last thing that we do. So starting on April 7th now. So if we move to page 395 in our book, and it transition again, one of the next to Job, I think this is the second uh, book with Ruth being moved forward in chronological order compared to our traditional uh, Bibles that we normally use. And so April 7th on page 395, where Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz lived during the period of the end of the into the Judges, and it talks about the genealogy of Jesus to Jacob, via Boaz, and Ruth. So let's turn over. If you want to follow along with me, I've got marked in our chronological Bible 1299, where it's got Matthew 1 verses 1 through 17. This is a record of the ancestors of Jesus the Messiah, a descendant of David and of Abraham. And if you read down under, I'm not going to go through all of them. And by the way, First Chronicles 1 through 4, again, it gives a whole lot more descendant discussion that was also moved forward in our readings for as part of our readings for this week. So Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon. And then it goes on to further explain ancestry according to Matthew. So yeah, exciting, pretty big transition point in our genealogy study where we start to see the genealogy of Jesus showing up in the Old Testament as Ruth gets introduced. And I like this. I pulled out of our reading here is um, gives birth to Obed. Praise the Lord, who has now provided a redeemer for your family. May this child become famous. So that's and there's a lot more interesting read there with that making reference to the importance of this period, this time. I know this is not, it's not intended for you to be able to read this if you are in the classroom. And the next time I've got the opportunity to teach, and this is a full wall chart that I'd purchased and printed, where even this actual screenshot shows from Adam to the Jacob to the tribes. The very bottom there, just before it goes off the page, begins with the tribe of Judah. The second half of this starts to describe the genealogy that we just read. So once we get back into the classroom together, we can make some reference to that. Or again, continuing your reading in the Bible and in the New Testament and the First Chronicles, where it talks about genealogy, and it's pretty cool there from a historical standpoint, making that connection, right? The importance of Jesus and to the Old Testament. Then we move to page 403. Again, First Chronicles is plugged in there with some of the genealogy, and then we've got April 9th, starting on page 3, we've got Hannah introduced. Hannah starts to pray for a son, and Samuel is born. So goes through Samuel's birth, Samuel's dedication. Samuel, and I've got a question I'm going to ask for with the group, and I'll do my next pause question around what Hannah does with Samuel. She goes through all the prayers, praying for a son, trust in the Lord, and Samuel's born. Samuel goes. She dedicates. She says, I am giving Samuel to the Lord, and he will belong to the Lord his whole life. And they worshiped him. I'm reading at the top of page 404. And then she kept that commitment to the Lord, the promise. She left Samuel as a boy, and he began to serve and assist Eli as a priest. Eli's got some sons who are in our plain description version in our chronological Bible, saying that the sons were scoundrels. and how basically they treated the Lord, the temple, sacrifices, um, everything they did was for themselves, and they ignored and disgraced the Lord. Sound familiar, right? Uh, to the cycle. So we've got Samuel at a young age. He's working for the priest, and the priest's sons are in the picture. The Lord begins to speak to Samuel. Samuel has discussions with the Lord. Samuel's both a prophet and a judge. Samuel's the last uh, judge, and the as this cycle starts to uh, continue again about sin and oppression is going to come back in to the picture again. Samuel speaking to the Lord on behalf of the Israelites, saying, again, here we are again. Israel has no king, and the people of Israel are asking for a king, and the Lord's again, I'm summarizing the next few pages, but the Lord responds and says, "No, no, Samuel, they don't know what they're asking for. They don't want. They think they want a king, but they're not. Uh, be careful. Be careful what you ask for." Then we've got a period in here with the Philistines. Again, another battle, just like all the way through the book of Judges, and this is continuing into Samuel too, where the hundreds of thousands of during the battles and the death and the destruction, and another battle with the Philistines. Philistines actually capture the altar. Excuse me, they capture the ark until the Lord puts a curse on the Philistines, and then they wise up quickly and decide, hey, let's come up with a plan to get this turned back. So the ark was not in the hand of the Philistines for a uh, very long period of time. And again, Samuel intervenes, and he leads Israel to victory as he grows older. Again, as a judge, Samuel's still described as a judge when we get into um, 1 Samuel 7 and 8. And again, Israel continues to request a king, and then Samuel continues to warn the Israelites. That's on page 411 about God's warning uh, to the people. And again, part of what Samuel does again, like we saw with Moses and Joshua, Samuel's back reminding the Israelites again, all the way to the Exodus. It's back to how soon we forget, how soon the people forget about what God had done for them. Okay, here's our next reflection question, and that's if you would turn back to Hannah's prayer, and that's on page 404. Hannah's prayer of praise, 1 Samuel 2, verses 1 through 11. So again, you can hit a pause here, self-reflect, send me a text or chat. Again, Hannah gives birth to Samuel, and as she stated, she leaves him with the Lord, leaves him with the Lord at a young age, right? Think about just that we go back to Abraham and Isaac, the sacrifice. Here we've got Hannah who's prayed and prayed, and the Lord answers her prayers, and she's quote leaving her son in good hands in the temple with Eli, and then the evil brothers. So, what strikes you about Hannah's decision, and as you read through her prayer of praise? And again, I'll pause for a minute, and you can hit the pause button as you read through her prayer and reflect. Again, several things that come to mind for me. Again, her faithfulness and trust in the Lord. She starts out, my heart rejoices in the Lord. The Lord has uh, made me strong. Um, he he protects the faithful ones. Those who fight against the Lord will be shattered. Right? Pretty wise words that she's sharing. He thunders against them from heaven. The Lord judges throughout the earth. He gives power to his king. So share your thoughts, have some discussions, spend a moment and read through Hannah's praise to the Lord. Again, there's pretty transitional periods here. Again, as we get to the final years of the judges, we've gone in 10 minutes talking about the Ruth and the genealogy of Jesus. And now Samuel comes into the picture as the last judge, and then shortly after that, we've got Saul that comes into play. So, chapter 8 ends when Saul becomes king. So on page April 9th through 11th, this pages 403 to 416, the Israelites return to their old ways. Saul's acclaimed the king. Again, Saul continues to remind them what the Lord has done. That's why I put the cycle, the little circle that I showed on the first couple slides. It's like it's like Groundhog Day. It's all the whole cycles beginning all over again. Okay, so I'm going to transition out now, and then I'll stop sharing my screen. So again, hopefully you guys will stick with me here just a minute, and then I'm going to do the animation of the entire book of Judges, and it only runs about 7 minutes. So please stick on, and then I'll give you an opportunity to have discussions around book of Judges.
So remember, after Joshua led the tribes of Israel into the promised land, he called them to be faithful to their covenant with God by obeying the commands of the Torah. And if they do this, they will show all the other nations what God is like. So Judges begins with the death of Joshua and basically tells the story of Israel's total failure. The book's name comes from the type of leaders Israel had in this period. Before they had any kings, the tribes were all governed by these judges. Now, don't think of a courtroom. These were regional political military leaders, more like a tribal chieftain. And you need to be warned, the book of Judges is very disturbing and violent. It tells the tragic tale of Israel's moral corruption, of its bad leadership, and basically how they become no different than the Canaanites. But this sad story is also meant to generate hope for the future. And you can see this in how the book's designed. There's a large introduction that sets the stage for Israel's failure as they don't drive out the remaining Canaanites. Then the large main section of the book has stories about the growing corruption of Israel's judges. And the progression here shows how Israel's leaders go from pretty good to okay to bad to worse. The concluding section is really disturbing and shows the corruption of the people of Israel as a whole. So let's dive in and we can explore each part a bit more. The opening section begins with the tribes of Israel in their territories in the Promised Land. And while Joshua defeated some key Canaanite towns, there was still a lot of land to be taken and lots of Canaanites living in those areas. And so chapter 1 gives a long list of Canaanite groups and towns that Israel just failed to drive out from the land. Now, remember, the whole point of driving out the Canaanites was to avoid their moral corruption and their way of worshiping the gods through child sacrifice. God had called Israel to be a holy people, and that does not happen. Chapter 2 describes how Israel just moved in alongside the Canaanites and adopted all their cultural and religious practices. And it's right here that the story stops. For nearly a whole chapter, the narrator gives us an overview of everything that's about to happen in the body of the book. This part of Israel's history, the narrator says, was a series of cycles moving in a downward spiral. So Israel became like the Canaanites, and so they would sin against God. So God would allow them to be conquered and oppressed by the Canaanites, and eventually the Israelites would see the error of their ways and repent. So God would raise up a deliverer, a judge from among Israel who would defeat the enemy and bring about an era of peace. But eventually, Israel would sin again and it would all start over. This cycle provides the literary design and flow for the next main section of the book. It gets repeated for each of the six main judges whose stories are told here. Now, the stories of the first three judges, Othniel, Ehud, and Deborah, they are epic adventures. They're also extremely bloody stories. Either the judge themselves or people who help the judge, they defeat their enemies and deliver the people of Israel. The stories about the next three judges are longer, and they focus in on the character flaws of the judges, which get increasingly worse. So Gideon, he begins pretty well. He's a coward of a man, but he eventually comes to trust that God can save Israel through him. And so he defeats a huge army of Midianites with only 300 men carrying torches and clay pots. But Gideon has a nasty temper, and he murders a bunch of fellow Israelites for not helping him in his battle. And then it all goes downhill from there. He makes an idol from the gold that he won in his battles. And then after he dies, all Israel worships the idol as a god, and the cycle begins again. The next main judge is Jephthah, who's something of a mafia thug living up in the hills. And when things get really bad for Israel, the elders come to him begging for his help. And Jephthah was a very effective leader. He won lots of battles against the Ammonites, but he was so unfamiliar with the God of Israel, he treats him like a Canaanite god. He vows to sacrifice his daughter if he wins the battle. This tragic story, it shows just how far Israel has fallen. They no longer know the character of their own God, which leads to murder and to false worship. The last judge, Samson, is by far the worst. His life began full of promise, but he has no regard for the God of Israel. He was promiscuous, violent, and arrogant. He did win brutally strategic victories over the Philistines, but only at the expense of his own integrity, and his life ends in a violent rush of mass murder. Now, a quick note here. You'll notice a repeated theme in the main section of the book that at key moments, God's Spirit will empower each of these judges to accomplish these great acts of deliverance. Now, the fact that God uses these really screwed up people doesn't mean he endorses all or even any of their decisions. God is committed first and foremost to saving his people, but all he has to work with is these corrupt leaders. And so work with them he does. This whole section is designed to show just how bad things have gotten. You can't even tell the Israelites and the Canaanites apart anymore, and that's just the leaders. The final section shows Israel as a whole hitting bottom. There are two tragic stories here, and they are not for the faint of heart. They're structured by this key line that gets repeated 4 times at the close of the book. In those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. The first story is about an Israelite named Micah who builds a private temple to an idol, and that gets plundered by a private army sent from the tribe of Dan. So they come and they steal everything, and then they go and burn down the peaceful city of Laish and murder all of its inhabitants. It's a horrifying story. When Israel forgets its God, might makes right. The final story of the book is even worse. It's a shocking tale of sexual abuse and violence, which all leads to Israel's first civil war. It's very disturbing. And that's the point. These stories are meant to serve as a warning. Israel's descent into self-destruction is the result of turning away from the God who loves them and saved them out of slavery in Egypt. And now Israel needs to be delivered again from themselves. The only glimmer of hope in this story is found in this repeated line in the last part of the book. It actually forms the last sentence of the story. Israel has no king. And so the stage is set for the following books to tell the origins of King David's family, the book of Ruth, and also the origins of kingship itself in Israel, the book of 1 Samuel. But the story of Judges has value as a tragedy. It's a sobering explanation of the human condition, and ultimately it points out the need for God's grace to send a king who will rescue his people. And that's the book of Judges. The books of 1st and 2nd Samuel They're two separate books in our modern Bibles,
Okay, we escape out of that, and
but that division is due simply to scroll length.
yes, we need God's grace. Amen. A fractured world then and a fractured world today. Actually, I like those animations. The Bible Project, I believe what's they're called. We're almost finished here. Hopefully, you're still with me and kind of walk through. That gives you in 7 minutes and 25 seconds a summary of the book of Judges and what we've been studying through, and then a transition. Then I just want to finish reading here, and that'll be a good segue into what we start into next week as we continue the handoff from Saul being acclaimed king, Samuel's farewell address, again reminding the Israelites of where they came from, and then our teacher for next week will pick up on tomorrow for April 12th around more family tree and history with King Saul. So on page 414, Saul is acclaimed king. Later, Saul called all the people of Israel to meet the Lord at Mizpah and said, "This is what the Lord, the God Israel, declared. I brought you from Egypt and rescued from the Egyptians and from all the nations that you were oppressing. But though I have rescued you from your misery and distress, you have rejected your God today and have said, 'No, we want a king instead.' Now, therefore, present yourselves before the Lord by the tribes and the clans." And then Samuel brought all the tribes together before the Lord. Then he brought each family of the tribe of Benjamin before the Lord and went through the process. And when it was all said and done, they chose Saul by drawing lots, and all the people shouted, "Long live the king!" And again, just like I did on the first slide, king with a lowercase k, King. So pretty brutal as we look back and wrap up on the book of Judges, but pretty exciting, right? Pretty exciting for us also now that we know how it all plays out and seeing some of the very key players in history, especially with the lineage of Jesus Christ, our King with a K. So hopefully you stuck with me. Thanks for the opportunity again. I learn every time I prepare for these, and hopefully you guys can use this as a chance to get something out of your discussions together. And good Lord willing, we'll pick up in person a week from tomorrow. God bless you all and enjoy your week, and hope to see you all in person tomorrow.